is the copper.
Okay.
And it's good to do 2 firings, but I'll get back to that. But just to show you, you know, basically what this is doing is picking up texture, I think, from the brush strokes and putting the white on go by. And then this side is just the texture of the clay. But this is a, you know, a nice sort of finished, not in your face, showing the form kind of surface. You know, if you want to go for something like that, if you like the piece before it was bisque fired, you want sort of an overall, just I want to finish the surface and have a beautiful surface, but I don't want to deal with detail, pattern. I just want the form to read the form. Putting a copper wash and firing it, and then covering it with the terracige is, you know, sort of takes it back to that place before it was bisque fired. So, you know, things don't have to get crazy. You don't have to do pattern and get a lot of color involved. I mean, so putting this on, you see right away it's in the container. It's not it's not going to be anything that has any kind of substance when it comes out. What you have to keep in mind, and I think this is sort of mixed up to be the perfect consistency, because you really don't want to use an oxide really any heavier than this.
So it's down in those details.
It's
They're
down in
showing
detail,
up.
right? But if and this is the other thing that's you have to keep in mind, is that this is copper by itself, fired, no shine. This is the same kind of surface with copper on it, with a glaze on it. So what you see, you know, copper when copper doesn't get near the water, it stays brown, dark brown. Once you get something that melts onto it, it turns green. So that's something to keep in mind, is that once you get a glaze involved, things can change, and not necessarily in the direction that you hope they would. You know, like somebody might hope that this would just get to be a shiny black, and it's just not, this isn't the solution for that. So, if you want to take more off, you know, if you don't want that much, if you really don't want any color in the crevices, I mean in the higher surfaces, you can either take a brush or you can always take a sponge. And you just sort of, it's washing, you know, this is why they're called a wash. You just put it on and you take it off. Now, it used to always seem to me that you could put an oxide wash onto a piece, and then you could put a glaze on it and fire them together. More and more I have found that the oxides have a tendency to act like a thick layer of dust on the surface of the clay. So what that means is the glaze if you put a glaze on it, starts melting, and it's rolling around on top of this dust, and it can't find anything to stick onto. So if you took this wash, and let's pretend, well, I could be refiring this. Let's really try to get some sludge down here. If I thought, oh, I really, really want this to be green, so I'm going to really, really put a lot of copper on this surface, and then I'm going to put a glaze on it. I mean, if all you want is to use a wash and have a dry surface, sort of like that tile but more intensified, and put nothing on it, you can apply it this heavy. And actually you could fire it and you could put a glaze on top. But once this dries, if I go and put a glaze on top,
Without the fire?
and then fire them together, all the glaze that I'm applying right here will be down on the shelf, or will all be grabbing onto this very bottom, because it'll fall away from that, because there's nothing, it doesn't go around corners. it moves down, and it will probably, once it starts moving, it will attach itself here, and then it will all be down here. So this is something to keep in mind, is that I always think generally, now in this situation, we're getting close to the end, we try to figure out how to do these things. If you say you wanted to cover the whole thing with the wash. If you just said to me, I like this, I like the texture up here, and I also want these lines to really pop out. I want to do the whole thing first in the wash, and then I'm going to put stuff on it. I would say go for it, we'll fire it, vet it out, and then you go put stuff on it, and then we fire it a second time. We have to figure things out, because it's getting, the firings, when it's something bigger, it's much more, it takes up more space. So,
could you use the oxide as draw a line with it and use that as a resist? Or is not really a
no,
good idea?
it doesn't, it's not that.
It's not gonna stick and stay.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I think maybe that's headed in a direction that might work at some point, but anyway, the oxides can be used with a lot of different things. They can also go on top of the glaze. And because it's such a thin layer, if it goes on top of the glaze, it's going to be shiny, but it's going to be metal on top of the glaze. You got to figure that anytime we're talking about Mike's Clear, where it starts out as a clear glaze, you can see right through it. It affects some of the colors a little bit, but not all of them. Most of them, the color that it is, when you put a layer of glass down on it so it becomes shiny, the color is pretty true. But keep in mind that you are literally putting a layer of glass on top, and so it has that look of a piece of glass on top. If you paint the layer clear, and then you put the oxide on top, and you can do that in the same firing, or you can do it in 2 firings, and it'll give you very different results. But it's the metal floating on top of that glass, so it's up closer to you, it melts, but it's like a metallic surface that is right on top. It's not underneath something. So there isn't that sort of distance.
Does it get green still?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I just had in terms of them being different, just to sort of show you, both of these are a different glaze, but both of these situations where you can see the cracks, this is where the glaze has been fired, and then an oxide has been put on top of it and fired in the second firing. So the glaze crazes when it melts, and I think that's partly a sign of the glaze not completely fitting the clay body. But so when you do things separately that way, it sort of picks up stuff that you wouldn't get if you fired them at the same time. Okay, so the oxide washes are dry. The basic colors, the copper I find to be the most sort of volatile. It does the most, it reacts the most. Things that are hard to sort of get over is that cobalt carbonate is going to look pink before it's fired. It's cobalt. If it says cobalt, it's going to give you royal blue. It's not going to give you pink. You just have to remember these things. And then on the flip side, chrome is always going to give you chrome green. Iron is always going to give you basically brown. People say red, but this is really brown.
Very brown.
Very brown.
When it comes out.
It's not red. Manganese is more interesting, and I'll get to that later. But you'll find that for the most part, for the washes, I think copper and cobalt get used a lot. Iron is harder to kind of deal with because when it's dry, when it's in this consistency, it will stain your hands, it will stain your clothes. When you put iron into a glaze, you get a glaze that's very, very, very pale yellow. You don't get brown. So, with the wash, when you put a flare on top of it, you don't get brown shiny, you get kind of an amber pale. So that's another one with gloss, it changes.